Today I'm going to be sampling 10 new audiobooks and letting you know what I think of them. I have so many audiobooks on my TBR right now, mostly in my Libro.fm account. I'm a part of the Libro.fm ALC program, which is the Advanced Listeners Copy program, where they send out, similar to ARCs, which you receive physically or as an ebook, these are advanced audiobooks. And I never get around to listening to all of them in the given month that the books are coming out. I've got quite a backlog. Their selections have been very good recently, so there's a lot of books I'm really interested in, but I just haven't started them yet. And so I thought it would be a fun idea to try a chapter situation where I read the first chapter of 10 different audiobooks. Most of these come from my Libro.fm. There's a couple that came from Everand. If you're interested in checking out either of those programs, I do have links down below where you can get free trials. This is not sponsored by any of them, just letting you know, if you want to get free trials, try them out. I think I get free trials or free audiobooks for referrals for those programs. But anyways, I'm excited to get into them, listen to a lot of the first chapters. I'm also in a place where I'm ready to pick up another audiobook, but I don't know what I want to read. I don't know what I'm in the mood for. I've been reading from a more diverse range of genres this year across sci-fi and fantasy and romance and all different kinds of things, and I feel like I could read anything right now. I don't know if I want a romance or a mystery or a horror book or a thriller or a fantasy or a sci-fi. I feel like I could be down for anything if it's a good listen. So I've picked a selection of 10 different audiobooks across all the genres that I primarily read. I'm going to try the first chapter of all of them and I will let you know how they go. Okay, hello. I've gotten through the first 5 audiobooks and I've been taking vigorous notes, but I feel like this is all going to pile up to be a lot to remember if I just listen to all 10 and then try to tell you all about them. So I figured I'd stop halfway through after the first 5 and let you know what I thought about all of them. So first up, I listened to I Was a Teenage Slasher. This is the new horror book from Stephen Graham Jones, and I've been kind of iffy on picking this up. I've been wanting to see some early reviews before I pick it up because I typically find that I enjoy his novellas a lot, but his novels don't always work for me the best. But this was a part of the Libro.fm ALC program, so I was able to pick up a copy for free, and I decided to lump it into this experience. For each of these audiobooks, I'm going to be telling you about what happened in the first chapter, what my thoughts were on the first chapter, how I felt about the narrator, because that's important for me when I'm listening to an audiobook, that I'm enjoying the narrator and the way that they are bringing the story to life, and what my overall rating of the first chapter is on a scale of 1 to 10. So first off, what happens in I Was a Teenage Slasher? This is a sort of mock memoir type of story where you're reading from the perspective of the main character, Tolly, and they are reflecting on their experiences when they were a teenager, and then I suppose they started murdering people because they describe themselves as a teenage slasher. The audiobook starts off with rock music, and I feel like that was really nice and immersive to get into the headspace for this novel because it is set in the 80s, and then you get the rock music, and then you've got this kind of gruff character talking about how things went wrong and being reflective on those experiences. He's also writing to his friend Amber, it seems, who he is no longer in contact with, and then once he starts reflecting on his experiences, he talks about being around Amber, so that was clearly a person who was very important to him, who he no longer has in his life, and it sounds like he has some regrets about whatever happened when he was a teenager. How I felt about this first chapter, I was not super over the top hooked into this. I don't feel like it did anything to really pull me in, but I liked it. I like the atmosphere and the tone it's building. It kind of reminds me of Paul Tremblay style writing, which makes sense because Paul Tremblay really admires Stephen Graham Jones and probably tries to emulate Stephen Graham Jones' writing. So it's probably more of that kind of situation, but I just tend to read more Paul Tremblay, so that's why I thought of him. I think this mock memoir style works really nicely for the audiobook because it's sort of like the main character is just telling you a story, and I really like that vibe of an audiobook when you're supposed to be listening. The story's being told to you. Those are the types of stories I think work really well in audiobooks, so I think it's a nice experience to do it that way. How I felt about the narrator was not the best. I didn't love the narrator. They have a little bit of a gruff voice that's a little bit difficult to understand, so I think it's an audiobook I would have to listen to a little bit slower before I could speed up to my normal pacing. But it wasn't bad. It actually works pretty well for the tone of the story, and overall I am giving this first chapter a 6.5 out of 10. Did Didn't love it, felt a little bit better than neutral about it. I would keep going with this audiobook and listening further, but I don't know. I can't say right now that I would definitely finish the whole book. It feels like something maybe I'd listen to a couple chapters and I could see myself bailing out of, or it could totally pull me in. It could really go either way. Next, I listened to One of Your Kind. This is a story where you're following a Black woman named Jasmine and her family as they are touring this new community that is being set up to be a Black utopia. The neighborhood is called Liberty, and it is for only Black people. It is a wealthy neighborhood, it's a gated neighborhood, and it seems like it's building up to this too good to be true situation. Jasmine's observing the neighborhood and thinks it looks great. She sees some Black Santas on the lawn because I guess it's close to Christmas time, and that really resonates with her, and she's looking forward to moving to this community. But there's also this eeriness set up in it where it's like, this is too good to be true. Utopias never last. What is going to be going on wrong here? And this is a thriller book, so you know that as a reader too, that clearly something's going to go wrong. Jasmine's going to uncover things about this community as the story goes on. I feel like I've read several books like this. The most recent one I can think of is The Getaway by Lamar Giles, which I read last year. That's a YA story that has a pretty similar setup. So how I felt about this first chapter, I wasn't overly hooked just because it does feel a little bit familiar. It didn't do anything within that first chapter to surprise me, hook me in the story, make me feel like it was going to go in a direction that I haven't necessarily seen done before. So I ended up feeling pretty neutral about it. I did like the narrator of this one. That checked my boxes, good narrator. But all in all, I ended up just giving this a 5 out of 10. Next, I listened to The Murder After the Night Before, and this is described as a whodunit story. In the first chapter, you're following your main character as she is waking up hungover after her company's holiday Christmas party, and she finds a man in her bed. Unfortunately, he's alive. I was kind of hoping he'd be dead. I thought that would be a really great hook for a first chapter, but he's alive, but she has no memory of him or what happened the night before, and she's just trying to struggle and get up and get back to work because it's still the middle of the work week. Nothing necessarily happened in this first chapter beyond that. It was a pretty short first chapter, but you really got immersed in the character's headspace and voice in this first chapter, and I loved it. I loved this main character. You can tell this has a sort of witty, dry humor to it. It's very silly, and it was just a really funny character to be with for the first chapter. She's waking up next to this guy, and she's like, I don't know who this is or what happened last night. And so she's like, I'm gonna sit here and do Kegels to try to determine if we had sex last night. And he's just like, do you even know who I am? Like, my name's Jack. You told me all of these things about your life story and all of the troubles you had last night, but like, you don't remember my name. Like, come on, what's going on here? So it was just funny. It kind of reminded me of Fleabag. I feel like I'm really gonna like this one. I also loved the narrator voice on this. I thought they did a really great job bringing this character to life. It's also a British narrator, and there's just something about a British narrator that I really enjoy. All in all, I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10 because while I did love this character, nothing really happened in that first chapter to hook me in the story, but it's definitely one I'm going to continue with, and definitely one that I feel like is going to be really, really good on audio. Next up, I listened to The Wedding People, and in the first chapter of this one, you're following your main character, Phoebe, who is arriving to this really fancy hotel. She accidentally gets mistaken as one of the wedding people there because a lot of people are there for this big wedding that's happening over the weekend, and people just assume she's part of them. This was a really long first chapter. It was about 40 minutes, so it was a lot of time of Phoebe just getting in the environment, listening to people who are the wedding people talking, just overhearing their conversations. She's thinking about her own experiences and why she's there. She is a professor, she's recently divorced, and this is in the immediate near future after the COVID pandemic. I think it's 2022 because she keeps talking about things that happened in the past 2 years. There's a lot of context set around the pandemic and how she's been like remote teaching and how she's been feeling more isolated, and especially feeling more isolated in the aftermath of the divorce from her husband. She's clearly very devastated about this divorce. And so she's just arriving at this hotel. She's hearing these people talk. And then even the bride mistakes her for being a guest at the wedding and like hugs her. It's like, oh my God, hi, thank you for being here. Like, here's the gift bag. And she's just kind of going with it for a minute because she doesn't really know what else to do. And then she ends up getting in the elevator, and she ends up in the elevator with the bride. And this did surprise me. This was the first chapter so far to do something that made me go, oh, and actually like hook me within the first chapter. And when she's in the elevator with the bride and ends up saying like, I'm not one of your wedding guests, I'm not one of your family members, like you just made a mistake. And she's like, well, why are you here? Phoebe says she is at the hotel to kill herself. That was a really shocking moment for me, and now I'm seeing what the setup of this story is. So she's thinking about wanting to be at this inn because it's this beautiful place. She always wanted to go with her husband, but now she's unfortunately going by herself. And I'm thinking like, okay, you're gonna treat yourself. This is like a little way to try to get back on your feet. But really she's here to end her own life, which is really devastating. And the way that the bride takes that information is a little bit of levity in that moment, because she's just like, well, you can't do that. You can't pause. You're gonna ruin my wedding. You can't kill yourself. I'm surely, like, what about your husband and kids? You're wearing a wedding. Like, you can't do that. That's gonna ruin my entire wedding. I've been planning this my whole life. You can't do that. Not because she has any real concern for this woman and her life, only because she's worried about her own wedding potentially being ruined. But Phoebe's like, no, this is the best way to do it because the hotel staff will just deal with it, and this is the most convenient way that I can put an end to my own life. I'm doing it tonight. Sorry, that's what I'm doing. So then I checked the synopsis, and I think her and the bride are going to be spending time with one another, talking to one another, becoming emotional supports for one another. And I imagine this book is going to take a hopeful turn and move in a happier direction. But it is very melancholic. I can tell it's going to be a very hard-hitting, emotional type of read. How I felt about this first chapter in general, I think it was a good first chapter for the type of book that this is. I also liked the narrator. I thought they hit the tone just right for this character. But I'm just not in the mood for something like this right now. It feels like it's going to be heavier than what I'm looking for in the moment. So all in all, I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. And last in this batch, I listened to Margo's Got Money Troubles. In the first chapter of this story, you are following a main character named Margo, who finds herself in an unfortunate situation when she ends up getting knocked up by her professor at the age of 19 and having his baby and not having a lot of support around her. The way this audiobook starts is a breaking of the fourth wall, where the narrator is talking to you and saying, I know when you start a book and you read that first chapter, you really want it to pull you in. You want to feel like it's kissing you on the neck. Like, she used some kind of beautiful language when she wrote that. And as I'm listening to that, I'm like, whoa, is this fucking play about us? Because I'm sitting here doing a try a chapter tag, and it very much felt like I was being confronted in that moment. But it was very effective. I really liked that. And I like the writing style of this one in general. There's moments of breaking of the fourth wall, and there's sort of moments of perspective switching where sometimes it reads more like a diary and sometimes it reads more like a third person story. It is a longer first chapter. It was about 30 minutes, and it started with Margo talking about how she got in this situation, the immediate aftermath of having the baby and not being in a great headspace, and then starting to reflect on how she got herself into the situation, meeting the professor, and the events leading up to this. The narrator was Elle Fanning. How cool is that? And I thought she did a fantastic job with this. It's very immersive, very much brings the character to life. I think this is going to be a really good audio experience. How I felt about this first chapter though, I'm not super into it. Like, this just doesn't seem like my type of story that I would gravitate towards normally. It just seems more like a contemporary fiction book, which I don't read a ton of, but I do think it's performed really well, and I really liked the writing style of it. So I'm giving this one a 7.5 out of 10, and I do think it's something I'll continue on at least for a few more chapters and then see if I end up wanting to listen to the whole thing. So that was my first update, my first batch. Now I'm going to go listen to the next 5 and let you know what I think. Okay, I finished the second batch of audiobooks, and I don't know if this one was as good. Let me look at the average rating. So my average rating for the first batch was a 6.6, and my average rating for this batch was a 5.7, so not as good, but I did have a 10 out of 10 in this batch, which I did not have in the first batch. So starting off, first I want to tell you about in this grouping is Not in Love, the new Ali Hazelwood book. I've read a couple Ali Hazelwoods. I'm interested in it. The first chapter of this one, it starts with a note from Ali Hazelwood saying, hey, just a heads up, this book's not going to be quirky and fun and silly like most of my books usually are. It's going to be more serious. There's trauma the characters are unpacking, and they end up forming more of a physical relationship, and that's how they get connected versus like emotional, I guess. I don't know. So that was an interesting setup to the story. First chapter, the main character is some kind of scientist. I think like 3 out of 5 of these books in this batch, the main character was some kind of like scientist or grad student situation. I guess 2 out of 5, and maybe there was 1 in the beginning. Lots of like grad student vibes today. Her company / her loan assignment is getting purchased potentially by a private equity company, and she's talking to her friend about it, trying to figure out what that means. And they're at work, and then like the new people come in who are apparently part of this company that they're nervous about, and her friend's also like, and what about that guy you just hooked up with? And she's like, what do you mean? trying to like write it off, but I guess she had recently just hooked up with someone and her friend's asking her about it. And then the group of people walk in and she spots someone and she's like, oh shit. So I think that the guy she hooked up with is going to be one of these guys. Also, I could tell when it started, it said narrated by name and name. So I could tell it was dual narrators. And the first chapter was from the woman's perspective. The second chapter was from a man's perspective. So I did want to check out both narrators. So I listened to like 10 seconds of chapter 2 and I liked both narrators. The woman narrator, not my favorite, a little bit nasally if I'm being honest. The male narrator, I liked that voice a lot. And I like dual narrators in a romance, especially when there's dual perspectives. So that was all good. Thoughts on the first chapter? Did not really do a lot for me. Not a lot happened. Lots of technical verbiage used because their friend is telling them about the private equity and what that means. So I don't know. I don't think it was a very good first chapter. Didn't do anything for me. I'm giving it a 4 out of 10, but because I've read from Emily Hazelwood before, I know that I want to at least check out this book. So I'll listen to a couple more chapters, see if I get pulled into this book at a later time, but it's definitely not to the top of my priority out of everything I've listened to today. Next, I listened to The Honey Witch. This one, I was not sure what to expect. I know this is a very popular book, but I haven't really heard many reviews of it. I'm not as immersed in like the fantasy and the romance communities, so I don't see as much on these types of books. But this one gave me Bridgerton vibes big time. It was a longer first chapter. It was upwards or maybe even over 30 minutes and a lot happened at the beginning. It was like a prologue and then a little bit and a little bit. And you're like with this 100-year-old witch, and then all of a sudden you're following this 21-year-old woman named Marigold and she's going to this ball and her mom's like pressuring her to get married, but she doesn't want to get married. And she's going to the ball and she's talking about having to fill up her dance card, and this guy approaches her. They eat some sweet treats together. She's like, you can have all my dances. I'm gonna fill my dance card up with your name so that afterwards I can skedaddle and get out of here, because all she wants to do is go run around barefoot under the moonlight. Another guy ends up entering the ball, and it's a guy she's clearly been pining after for a long time. She hasn't seen him in a couple of years. He's kind of broken her heart, I guess. And then he proposes to another girl right in front of her face. That is the setup of what happens in chapter 1. I did check the synopsis to see what the book is about, and it sounds like she's going to spend time with her grandmother, who I assume is the 100-year-old witch, and figure out her path in life. I'm not really sure, but I really liked the vibes of it. I'm very much in a Bridgerton headspace right now after recently just watching the entire show over from the beginning. The narrator also just kind of had that tone and really carried the story. It was a good narrator. Overall, just like a cozy vibe, which I enjoy. Nothing happened to overly immerse me in the story, but I liked the vibes of it, so I'm giving it a 6.5 out of 10, and I do think I'll continue with it. Maybe not immediately, but I could see myself in the near future giving this one more of a chance. Next, I listened to Dreadful. In this one, you're following the perspective of a guy who is waking up and he has no memory of who he is or where he is. And this is a fantasy novel, and so he's in this like castle and he's worried that some like dark lord is going to find him and punish him for being there, but then he realizes that he is the dark lord. He doesn't have any idea of how he got where he is, who he is, or why he is the way he is. And I checked the synopsis, and that seems to be what the entire novel will be about, is him being put in this position and I don't know, I guess kind of like reevaluating himself now without having any memories of how he got to be the evil person that he is. The narrator was fine on this one. The first chapter was really, really long, so I didn't get through the whole thing. I just stopped at a good stopping point. And I can't say I'm really interested in this one. I think this is the least interesting book out of the batch that I listened to today. I'm giving it a 3 out of 10, and I cannot really see myself continuing with it. I just wasn't very interested in it. Next was The Stardust Grail, and this is a sci-fi book that doesn't necessarily sound like something I would typically pick up, but I did read the debut novel from this author that came out in the last year or two, and I really liked it. So I was interested to see what they were coming out with next. In this first chapter, you're following a 31-year-old grad student named Maya, who is a former thief. That doesn't explicitly come out in the first chapter, but you gather that from the synopsis, and then there's like little clues based on how she's acting and the things that she's thinking about in the first chapter. She is working in this department as a grad student, and they're getting in a shipment of these artifacts, and so she's an expert at it. She's looking at them, and then she is determining that they're fake because of the materials in them. And I was like, oh my god, how did you know that? And she's like, well, this has this material, and this was banned on this planet and whatnot. Then very quickly after that, she ends up getting a call from her academic advisor, and that's it. That's the first chapter. It's like 5 minutes long. It's very short, not a lot happens. But looking at the synopsis of this one, it looks like she ends up going on this kind of mystery journey where there's like an alien artifact that's gone missing, and if she finds it, she can save a planet or the galaxy or something. So it's gonna be a bigger sci-fi novel. This author's debut novel was also a sci-fi book. It was set in space, but it was a murder mystery set on a space station, so it was a little more contained. This one sounds like it might be bigger, a little more out of my comfort zone. And I did listen to this first chapter twice because I was like, wait, what? I needed to like reset and see what was going on. So I don't know about this one. I think I'm gonna give it another shot. I did like the narrator on this. I think I'm gonna listen a little bit longer to see. It didn't immediately turn me off, but I just don't know if it's gonna be my type of story. I ended up giving it a 5 out of 10 because I felt pretty neutral about that first chapter. And then finally, I listened to All This and More. And if you're paying attention, you know that I said one book got a 10 out of 10, and I haven't said that yet. This was the 10 out of 10. I am obsessed with this idea. I'm obsessed with this concept. I want to listen to this book right now, but I think I want to read it physically because in the first chapter of this, the book starts with a message to the reader. And the way this book is described is that it's about this reality TV show that is being filmed that contestants can go on, and you get the opportunity to see if you can change your life any way you want. So if you regret leaving a certain partner, if you've always wanted to leave your job, if you want to see what your life would be like if you lived in a different country, you get the opportunity to explore those options. And I think this is very literal because they talk about quantum bubbling, and this is like something sci-fi and speculative is going on. In the first chapter, the narrator is filling you in on the show, which is called All This and More, and the history of it and how the whole world was really excited about it. It was a really popular show, but then it went away, and now finally it's coming back. So not a lot happens in the first chapter. It's just the concept setting itself up. But you also get this note to the reader at the beginning that's explaining how you can listen to the book, which is you can choose to just listen and take the typical journey of an audiobook, but it's also a choose your own adventure. So you're gonna get to opportunities in the book where it's gonna let you choose how you want to proceed, and you can jump to other chapters to experience the book differently. It sounds like they have figured it out enough to make it something that is possible to do on audiobook, but for me, I want the physical book in order to have that experience. Maybe I would even pair the two because I liked the narrator, I liked the way the book was produced, I think it was done well, but I just want to like hold it and flip back and forth to have that sort of experience physically. So this book's gonna be at the top of my radar. I'm gonna get the physical copy, hope to be reading it very soon. And that's a wrap on all the books that I listened to today. So this is how all the books ended up stack ranking based on my ratings of their first chapters. As for which ones I'm definitely going to continue, I will definitely be continuing All This and More, but I do want to get the physical copy of that. I think The Murder After the Night Before is going to be my next audiobook because I really enjoyed that one, and I think the audiobook experience is going to be great for that. So I think I found my winner, the book that I'm going to be setting off with for the near future. Out of the rest of these for the long term, there are many of these that I do plan on continuing at least for a couple more chapters, and many of these that I think I'll probably end up reading the whole book. The others I'm less interested in, but I may end up picking them up at some point if I ever feel like I'm in the mood for them. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of these books and what you think about them. Let me know if there's any that you think I should definitely keep going and keep exploring the story if you've read them and you know like, hey, the first chapter is not great, but the book really ends up being really good. Let me know that down below. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.